It started out like any other quiet afternoon on our family farm, until a stranger pulled up in a spotless white SUV, clipboard in hand, and a shiny badge clipped to his belt. He claimed to be from the HOA and said he needed to inspect our barn. Now, we've lived out here for decades, and the barn's been standing longer than the HOAs even existed. So when this so-called HOA cop started walking toward it without permission, Grandpa wasn't having any of it. Grandpa's old school, served in the army, built the barn with his own hands, and doesn't like people poking around uninvited, especially not city folks flashing badges that don't mean much out here. He told the guy to stop, warned him, but the man just kept going, mumbling something about compliance checks. Now, here's where things got real interesting. What the HOA guy didn't know was that our bull Tank was in that barn, and Tank doesn't exactly make friends easily. So when the guy stepped inside, Grandpa calmly shut the door behind him and locked it. The next few minutes, chaos. You won't believe what happened when that city inspector came face to face with 1,800 pounds of attitude. Let's just say he won't be coming back anytime soon. Stick around, because this story only gets wilder from here. Now, before we get into what happened inside that barn, let me back up a bit so you understand why this whole thing was already tense from the start. Our property's been in the family for generations, way before there was ever an HOA in the area. When they started expanding the subdivision nearby, we didn't think much of it. But over the years, the new neighbors started filing little complaints: too much noise from the tractor, the smell from the livestock, even the rooster crowing at sunrise. It got so bad, the HOA sent letters demanding property inspections. Grandpa always said, "You don't need permission to live free on land you own." So when this so-called enforcement officer came snooping without notice, Grandpa figured enough was enough. What made it worse was the guy's attitude, talking down to us like we didn't know the rules on our own land. He kept referencing zoning regulations and community guidelines, waving that clipboard like it was the law. And the barn? That's Grandpa's pride. He rebuilt it after a storm back in '89. It's also where he keeps Tank, his prized bull, who's only friendly to a small handful of people. So when the guy crossed that line and walked right in without asking, Grandpa didn't just see a trespasser, he saw disrespect. And that's when everything took a turn. From inside the barn, we could hear movement, fast, nervous footsteps, and the unmistakable snort of Tank getting agitated. That bull doesn't like sudden noises or strangers, and the longer that HOA guy stayed in there, the worse it got. Grandpa stood outside, arms crossed, calm as ever. He didn't say a word, just watched the door like he knew exactly what was coming next. Meanwhile, Mom was on the porch, trying to call the county office. She figured there had to be some kind of mistake. We never got any real notice about an inspection, no official paperwork, nothing. Just this guy showing up, acting like we were criminals for storing hay and farm tools in our own barn. And that's when things started to spiral. Turns out, this wasn't just about us. A few of our neighbors had similar run-ins, people showing up unannounced, poking around sheds, asking strange questions. One neighbor down the road even had her chicken coop flagged for violating visual standards. The HOA seemed to be tightening its grip, trying to bring every last inch of land under control, even if it meant stretching the rules. Back at the barn, the banging started. Loud, panicked. Tank was clearly on edge. But Grandpa still didn't open the door. He said, "Let him learn what respecting boundaries means." And we all just stood there listening. The banging on the barn door grew louder and more desperate. We could hear the HOA guy yelling now, asking to be let out, promising he wasn't there to cause trouble. But Grandpa didn't move. He stood his ground, his eyes steady, like this was exactly how things were meant to play out. Tank's heavy breaths echoed through the wood, and every now and then, a loud snort or the heavy stomp of hooves sent chills down our spines. Inside, it was a mix of fear and frustration. The guy probably didn't expect to be trapped like this. Out here, things work differently. There are rules you don't just ignore. We've dealt with city officials before, but no one had ever challenged Grandpa's land like this. The tension wasn't just between the two men anymore. It was about respect, freedom, and the way we live. Mom was pacing, trying to decide whether to call the police or let Grandpa handle it. The neighbors had started to gather, whispers spreading about what was happening. Some wanted to help, others just watched, unsure if this was going too far. The line between protecting your home and escalating conflict was razor thin. And then, just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any thicker, there was a sudden crash from inside the barn, the sound of something heavy being knocked over. Everyone froze. What was Tank doing? What would happen next? The answer was hanging in the air, waiting to explode. Just as we were holding our breath, trying to make sense of the crash, a sudden shout came from inside the barn. But it wasn't from the HOA guy. It was Grandpa. His voice was calm but firm, telling Tank to settle down, which was surprising because the bull rarely listened to anyone but him. Then, out of nowhere, the barn door shook violently, as if someone was trying to force it open from the outside. But Grandpa was standing right there, blocking it. That's when things took an unexpected turn. From behind Grandpa, we spotted headlights speeding down the dirt road. Another vehicle coming fast, kicking up dust and making everyone tense. We didn't know who it was, but with the way they were driving, it wasn't just a neighbor coming by to check in. Suddenly, the quiet farm felt a whole lot smaller and the situation way more complicated. Inside the barn, the banging stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that was almost worse. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone was waiting, wondering what this new arrival meant. Was it someone coming to help? Or was this about to spiral out of control? The whole neighborhood had been on edge lately with the HOA pushing harder, but this felt like it was heading somewhere no one expected. And as the headlights got closer, we all knew one thing for sure: this story was far from over. The headlights slowed as the vehicle pulled up near the barn, and out stepped a familiar figure, our neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, who had always been quiet but fiercely protective of this land. Without hesitation, he strode over to Grandpa, nodding firmly before turning toward the barn door. With a firm hand, Grandpa unlocked it, and the HOA guy stumbled out, pale and shaken but unharmed. Tank, surprisingly calm now, stood just inside, his massive form looming but quiet. The HOA officer looked around, suddenly realizing this wasn't just any property. It was a family's lifetime of hard work and respect for their land. Grandpa's steady gaze made it clear: no more surprise inspections, no more disrespect. Mr. Jenkins quietly told the officer that if the HOA wanted to push this further, they'd have a serious fight on their hands. As the tension began to ease, just when we thought it was over, the officer pulled out a small badge and said in a low voice, "I'm not really with the HOA." That stopped us all. Turns out, he was an undercover investigator looking into some shady practices within the HOA itself, something about overstepping boundaries and abusing power. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one barn or one family, it was part of something much bigger. We watched as the officer drove away, and Grandpa shook his head with a wry smile. Sometimes, the quietest farms hold the loudest stories, and ours? Well, it was just getting started. After the officer left, the whole neighborhood seemed to breathe a little easier. What started as a simple barn inspection turned into something much bigger, exposing how far the HOA was willing to go to control people's lives. Grandpa reminded us that standing up for your rights isn't always easy, especially when the odds feel stacked against you. But sometimes it's exactly what's needed to protect what matters most. Over the next few days, word spread about the undercover investigation, and some neighbors who felt powerless before started speaking up. The community began coming together, pushing back against unfair rules and unexpected visits. We realized that our fight wasn't just about one barn or one bull. It was about respecting boundaries and preserving the freedom to live your life your way. As for Tank, He went back to grazing peacefully in the field, his presence a reminder that this land belongs to those who care for it deeply. Grandpa, ever steady, said, "If you want respect, you've got to earn it, and sometimes you've got to lock the door to make the point." This whole experience taught us that sometimes the biggest battles happen in the quietest places, and that standing your ground can change everything. Thanks for sticking with us through this wild story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life tales from the farm.